Greetings, travelers!
Greetings, travelers. We are in Jump Scare June, which is super
Jump Scare
exciting.
June, which has been
Jump
a lot of
Scare
fun.
June.
We've had a lot of fun with this. We've talked to some amazing people. We've had some incredible stories. Oh my gosh, your listener tales have blown us out of the water. We had a little bit of a log jam there. There was an issue with the website, and I guess I wasn't getting everything, and we weren't getting everything. And then suddenly, once we fixed one little thing, it was like a massive flood of listener tales and listener questions. So we will be doing those episodes ASAP, gang. So
And we'll be doing them live, so you guys will get an announcement so you can tune in if you want to see us do it live, will be exciting. The store's back up. That's another question the listeners have asked. We have fixed the store. I've actually found and killed every single gremlin, which was a lot more difficult than I thought. There were some that were hiding, so that's all good. And our special guest today is tied into our reminder that you can come see the Eerie Travels crew at an event coming up starting on the 28th, but mainly for visitors the 29th, which is Mark.
Small Town Monster Fest. And we wanted to talk about this event for a while. So we went to the man himself, the founder, the organizer, and the man who created Small Town Monsters. And that is the very impressive and impossibly awesome man, Seth Breedlove. So, Seth, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That's a lot. You said a lot. You threw a lot of hyperbole at me.
I'm going to start because Mark, you're going to jump in, you're going to fanboy. And
I
Seth
am.
needs to start with a little bit about him and small town monsters and everything. So
Mhm.
this is your shameless self-promotion for those that may not have heard of you, which would be weird.
Well, it's not that weird. Small Town Monsters is it's an indie film company focused on paranormal and cryptids around the US, I guess outside the US as well. And we've been around since 2015, so we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary next year, which we're very excited about. But we've made movies like The Mothman of Point Pleasant and The Mothman Legacy. We have a YouTube channel that does entirely different types of content from what we put in the films. We also have a book publishing company and a podcast network, all that run out of STM. So we're a group of, I guess at this point, 10 of us kind of stationed all around the United States. And that's us. That is the company. We grew from, I mean, I did everything out of my home. I do everything out of my home still, but I did everything out of my house for the first couple of years. And then we had an office, like we called it STM HQ for a while. And now we're back to running everything out of my house. But it's been a wild ride. And we are working on 4 or 5 different films currently. So we stay busy.
You guys always have something in the hopper. It seems like every week I see an announcement of something that you guys are working on or are
Mhm.
releasing and all that. Every year you guys have usually a very impressive Kickstarter program that I've been a backer of ever since it started. So that's something I look forward to every year.
Yeah,
Is
it's
watching that.
that for us is the most stressful month of our year, especially with the way things have gone the last 2 years. That Kickstarter has been very, very much necessary. In the earliest days, not in the early days, I guess sort of at the midway point, the Kickstarter almost went away for a little while. We kind of and we're still talking about kind of making next year the last Kickstarter year. I don't know if that'll be the case or not, but we've done it for so long. But early on, it just aided in printing DVDs, and now it's to the point where last year just literally kept us alive as a company for the year. So it's needed, but the hope is that long term, it won't be
Right.
as needed.
The goal of any business, right?
Yeah, it is. And yeah, you said like so we started out, we put out 2 movies a year for the first like 3 years, and then we started expanding to 3 to 4, and now we're kind of around, I don't know, 5 to 6 a year, like the feature films. But the episodic side of things is perpetually amping up. Last year we were sort of between March and I guess maybe very early fall, we were around probably 3 episodic series running, but we're up to 6 Starting in July, we'll be at 6 episodes per month coming out on the YouTube channel, and then all that stuff eventually graduates to Tubi and our Fast channel as well. So there's an endless array of stuff coming out. We've got Eli Watson is doing a mini series right now, which is part of the Sasquatch Unearthed series that's focused on LBL, the Land Between the Lakes. Alexander's still working on Bigfoot Beyond the Trail, but he's really focused on a series he just launched called Strange Places, which is kind of like an urban exploration / paranormal show. And then we're wrapping up shooting a new season of Sasquatch Unearthed. This one's called Buckeye Bigfoot, and it'll be focused here in Ohio. There's UFOs Revisited is coming out. And then starting next month, Ron Lanham and Joe Perdue's Wild and Weird show, which is called Paranormal Horizons, will start coming out. And that's super exciting for me because that's unlike anything we've ever done, which was basically, I've worked with those guys for years now, but basically I just said, are you interested in creating your own series for STM, doing all the filming, all the editing, everything on their end, however they want to do it. And they were both very excited about that prospect. So we went into business with them, and they're creating a 12 episode series. Hopefully it's season 1. We'd like to do the show, make the show an ongoing thing. Obviously that stuff always depends on the audience, but got the first 6 episodes from Ron yesterday. So they've already cranked out 6 episodes, and there's another 6 coming behind that. And then there'd probably be some sort of break before season 2 launches. But we've got other stuff we're talking about creating. By the end of the year, I'd like to see us at 8 ongoing series, episodic series. We've talked about doing a Bigfoot Revisited, similar to what we're doing with UFOs Revisited. And then Erin's pitched a couple shows, and Heather's always got ideas she's got in her brain. So we'll see what happens by year's end.
That's fantastic.
What got you started in all this? So you've got all of this content that you're doing, creating, but what made you even begin to do Small Town Monsters?
Just boredom. I worked a medical billing job, and I spent most of my day listening to podcasts. So this would have been like 2013, 2012, 2013, when I was really first heavily getting into the subjects. But the first thing I did was put together a book proposal for a book series called Small Town Monsters. And then I sent that around to different publishers, because it might be hard to fathom this today since I can barely string a sentence together. But early on, before film, I was a writer. I did freelance writing for local newspapers and children's articles, children's books, stuff like that. And so originally this was all conceived as a book series, but then all the publishers rejected it, and so I did what all failed writers do and just made movies out of what my original ideas were instead. But that's it. It really did come around through boredom. I just had nothing better to do with my day, and you just sit there. I mean, anyone that's worked a desk job, most of your time at a desk job, a cubicle job, is spent sort of like dreaming up things that could potentially get me out of doing this awful desk job, that I hate so much. So that's how it was.
And that makes sense. But when did you even start down the paranormal topics? Because as a writer and everything, you could be making movies about, trees, but you chose to go down the cryptid, paranormal, UFO route. Did that start from a different point?
So I didn't grow up into these topics at all. In fact, I was kind of oblivious that this was even a thing. The John Keel Mothman Prophecies book was the first time I became aware that people believe that UFOs are real. And that was just because my sister owned a copy of the book because she was enamored with Richard Gere, and she had bought the book because she bought the movie novelization, so it had Richard Gere's face on the book. And I remember seeing that book and asking what it was, and then she explained it, and then I started flipping through it, and I was like, so people think this stuff's real? She was like, yeah. And I was like, well, there's obviously something wrong with everybody. So that was my introduction to the paranormal, but I didn't really get into this stuff until way later. It was probably the mid 2000s, late 2000s, not late 2000s, but late, probably 2009, something like that is when I got fully invested in it. 2007, though, was the first time I interviewed a witness, and that was a lady who had ongoing Bigfoot activity near her house outside of Bolivar. And anyone who's seen On the Trail of Bigfoot the first series we did. You know, that series opens with me telling that story, but basically there was a ranch outside of town off of a road called St. Peter's Church. There's also another road back there called French Hill Road. And those two roads are real weird because you drive out of Bolivar, which is, you know, maybe 20 minutes south of Canton. So you're getting into the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, basically. But it's an odd thing. You drive out of town, which is all farmland, and then suddenly you're in this area that looks like it belongs in West Virginia. There's like the classic sort of hollers and stuff, and it's right outside of town. And I had never gone back there really, but when I found out about this activity taking place on this lady's property, I went back there, and I would drive around during the day and talk to people that I would see walking down the road and ask them if they'd had any crazy experiences. And I found out over time that there had been a lot of activity down there during the 70s, you know, a deer ripped in half and stuffed in trees, and farmers seeing strange figures in the woods. There was UFO activity. I can remember, though, as a kid, I talk about this all the time. I can remember as a kid, my sisters telling me that there was a satanic cult back there and that you would hear the scream during the day. Now I wonder if we weren't, and I remember hearing screaming. Now I wonder if we didn't hear like a Bigfoot call. Because where those sounds would originate would be on the other side of the river, which ran behind my parents' house, sort of in the direction of where all that activity took place. So that's what got me into it. It was just over time. I was interested in the fact that there was supposed Bigfoot activity near my home. And then, you know, when you listen to so many podcasts and you're intaking so much of what's going on in the Bigfoot paranormal world, and this is probably like 2007 through 2010, you know, I mean, I picked up on the fact that there wasn't a lot of content out there that I was into. Most of it was, you know, like the kind of Finding Bigfoot stuff where they go in.
That was probably peak Finding Bigfoot.
Yeah, it was. And like, that's all that really was on TV, was that kind of thing, and mountain monsters and that kind of stuff. And I mean, God bless all those people, because I know a lot of those people, and they're really nice people. I love what Finding Bigfoot did in terms of bringing in a younger audience, but that didn't appeal to me. I was interested in the sighting stories and the encounters and that kind of thing. I wasn't as interested in watching people walk around the woods and have nothing happen. So that's where, you know, the idea behind Minerva Monster came about, was that there was these sightings that had taken place outside of the town of Minerva, Ohio, back during the 70s. And I was aware of those sightings, and I was really interested in trying to document what had happened before the people that were actually involved passed away, or, you know, got too old to talk about it.
Exactly.
And so that's what we did. We just got the Caton family involved, and we made a movie that was just solely them telling, you know, the events that had happened in the 70s with the Minerva case. And then I enjoyed the process of making that movie to a certain degree, but it wasn't what I wanted to do with STM. I had no creative control over that movie necessarily. I sat in the edit and gave notes and things like that, but the editing was being done by someone else. And when we got, you know, the movie came out, this was 2015, we did a festival called Minerva Monster Day in Minerva, Ohio, to sort of promote the movie, and the event blew up. We ended up with like 1,200 people, which in Minerva is crazy because that's like the population of the town. But we had like 1,200 people flooded into downtown Minerva, and we realized like we should take the money we make from this and put it into doing another movie. And the movie that I wanted to make was Beast of Whitehall. But the way that process was going was not working out, because I was still trying to make it with the guys that had made Minerva with me, and we did not see eye to eye on how that movie should be put on screen. And so yeah, we ended up splitting with those guys, and they ran off with my footage that I had shot for that movie. So I turned around and reshot that entire movie, literally got all the interviews scheduled and everything, and reshot the whole movie myself. And that was my first, I mean, you can tell when you watch Beast of Whitehall that I don't have a clue what I'm doing with a camera, with an edit, sound, like anything. It's interesting to watch all the STM movies, but especially those early years, because you are watching people learn how to make movies in a very visible way. You know, most people, when they're learning to make movies, are doing it on YouTube or something, and they've got 70 views or 80 views. I mean, we were getting millions of views on stuff that is about as amateurish as as it could possibly be. But I think that's really cool that everything with SDM just kind of worked out, and some of it was coincidence. A lot of it is coincidence, because when we made Minerva, there was no Amazon was not open to filmmakers in 2014. That started a year later, really in late 2015. And by 2016, I was able to take that content, that movie, Beast of Whitehall 2, and post them directly for an audience. And, that wouldn't have been possible. Drones were not a thing. When we started on Minerva Monster, there was a Phantom drone that you could buy from DJI, didn't have a camera attached. So you had to put a GoPro on it, and you were basically flying blind unless you bought this crazy modded out kit, a monitor on your controller. So literally those first 2 years when we were flying the drone, we couldn't even see what we were filming. Like you're just blindly flying around this camera. But yeah, when I go back and watch that stuff now, it's still really cool to me that we built a following for something that was really amateurish. But I think what people were responding to was the fact that it was made in a way that, you couldn't get that kind of thing on television. And what I was finding, because everything with me in terms of storytelling and film really derives from a love for movies that my mom kind of imparted to me as a kid. And so when I was starting out, so much of what I was doing was why don't we try to impart a little bit of a police procedural into Beast of Whitehall, or Boggy Creek Monster was kind of pulling from 70s horror and things like that, Yeah. And now, when I do that kind of thing, I really go full bore with it anymore. Like our Jersey Devil movie is very much about the movies I loved as a kid, and Steven Spielberg and that kind of thing is really prevalent in that movie. But that was how learning to make movies was, just rewatching all the stuff I loved and then trying to put some of that in the movies we were making starting out. Now it's fun because I'm to the point where I can do an on the trail of Bigfoot as a series is not really, it's not pulling from anything. I don't dive deep into my inspirations with those movies. They're just kind of like nature films that I can kind of make how I want. The one I just finished is 2 hours and 22 minutes long, which is the longest movie I've ever edited. But I kind of with the series, that series has become more and more personal as it's gone on. The origin was made literally, I started filming it the day after my mom died in British Columbia. So that was very much a part of that story. And the one we just finished, The Ancients, is very much about my dad's family and, who they are and why it's important to keep our family history and, keep tabs on that kind of thing. I don't know.
What do you think makes a compelling documentary, and how do you get your stuff up to that level? How do you feel like you raised to that?
Early on, visually, I always wanted visuals to be very, I don't know how to put it. I'm not, like I said, I have a hard time stringing sentences together. It's weird that I used to be a writer. But the biggest thing to me is always that the visuals are engaging the audience, because I don't make movies for people who are into Bigfoot or into the paranormal. I make movies for people who are not into this stuff. And I think that's important because anyone who's into this stuff is going to already have watched our stuff. I've had that kind of ego about it since the earliest days. But, my ex-wife's grandpa used to be like my target audience because the guy didn't put any stock in any of this stuff. And so when I made movies for George, and I still do, because I want those people to be the people that come into it. So visually, I'm always trying to put something in there, that they haven't seen before, whether that's Santino's incredible effects work or some of the illustrations we've had from people like Matt Harris or Michael Broom who do illustrations for our stuff, or it's taking the audience to a place they'll never get to go, so a lot of people won't ever get to go to British Columbia, to Harrison Hot Springs. Right. And we get those comments all the time on social media and stuff from people who are like, thank you for paying so much attention to the location visually, so I can feel like I've been there. So that's important to me. The story is, end of the day, it's all about the story. And for me, the story is the people. more so than the monsters. I don't really pick movies based on my interest in a titular monster. I need to have, like, my into all of this always has to be the people that are involved. And then once I've chosen a story, and then I can kind of like find what the visual language of the movie is going to be. But again, like with On the Trail of Bigfoot, it's very easy because I don't do that. I don't sit down and watch movies ahead of time when I'm making it On the Trail of Bigfoot. It's just what it is. Whereas, you know, I'll do a lot of research when I'm working on something like Dogman Territory or the Jersey Devil. Like I'm very aware during the making of that and pre-production and through production and during the edit. I'm watching other things to help inform, you know, the language of the movie. I mean, I have an idea going into it of what I'm trying to achieve, but whether or not I actually get there, most of the time we don't get there.
Well, you started off thinking, you know, you said, I should say, that like you were like, it's crazy that people believe this. So did you not have paranormal experiences when you were younger?
No, the only exception to that would be that my parents owned an old building in downtown Bolivar where we, you know, my mom and dad owned a bookstore when I was a kid. So my dad, this is weird because my mom owned the bookstore, which was historical military, basically like a military bookstore focused on a heavy focus on the Civil War. But my dad owned a craft store. And so they bought this building in downtown Canton or in downtown Bolivar, and they ran the bookstore out of there. And all of us, I mean, in the 20 years they owned the building, all of us had weird experiences in that building with seeing figures, you know, like doors opening that shouldn't be open. Just a lot of weird stuff happened in that building over the years that we owned it. But I mean, I don't think any of us thought this is paranormal. You know, we didn't have that kind of like label to put on it. It was just, there's weird stuff that happens in that building. And, you know, my parents are I grew up in a Baptist family. So like that kind of thing was also not probably, it all was probably just sort of assumed was satanic if anything happened. So
Ohio in the 70s and 80s. There you go, gang.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't think we would have known to put that label on it, but we did all have experiences in that building. I'm trying to think of anything else. I mean, you heard about UFOs and stuff growing up. I mean, we traveled. My parents did book shows every weekend from March through November, from the time I was 6 years old until I graduated high school. And by then I moved on, you know, and was starting a life on my own. And so I grew up traveling every weekend. You know, I mean, I had 3 siblings. So there was a family of 6 in a van, probably 4 or 5 days out of the week, traveling around the country. So I'm sure we saw and experienced weird stuff, and it just flew by us because we were weird. So you're not going to notice as much the weirdness.
So how has your perspective on all this changed since you've been doing this so long now?
Well, it has changed. It's changed a lot because, like, I know coming into it, I didn't put a lot of stock in like UFOs. I was fascinated by UFOs, probably more so than Bigfoot, but I didn't put a lot of stock in the existence of UFOs. I didn't put a lot of stock in the existence of Bigfoot. But then, you know, everyone goes on like a journey through this, and what I don't think you hear about a lot is that everyone kind of evolves over time, and sometimes that evolution involves going from not a believer to believer back to not a believer. You know, like there's an evolution you go through while you're into this. And so I've evolved on everything, but especially like Bigfoot. I went from 100% just reading the encounters, this thing has to be real, to, you know, maybe 6-7 years of spending a lot of time in the woods in places that are historically supposed to have activity and having nothing happen. And then experiencing some things which moved the needle some for me to, you know, 2 years ago having my own sighting, where I'm still, I would still say I'm not 100% just because my sighting was so fleeting, but you evolve on everything. And the origins, the other thing that I've changed on a lot is like people like to blanket stuff together or put everything under one umbrella. And so there's the people who kind of think that all this stuff is connected, you know, Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, the whole thing is connected, and it might be. But personally, I set aside certain topics and just, you know, like for me, Bigfoot, The evidence, everything I've experienced is probably some sort of unknown primate. That's just how I've always been when it relates to Bigfoot. Dogman, I think, is some sort of weird manifestation of something very creepy. And then, you know, UFOs, whatever those are, I don't know. I still don't have much of an opinion. But yeah, the journey we all go through on this is very specific from person to person. Mine is a constant up and down roller coaster of where I stand on any of this from month to month.
I think that's interesting. We're going to have to go to a break in just a minute here. But what I find really interesting is how in depth you tell these stories, and you don't have die-hard believer as a label on you, which is a really good acknowledgement to the way you're making the films, because you don't look at this and go, this is somebody who doesn't believe 10,000% in what they're doing. And I think it probably gives the ability to not end up in tunnel vision with a belief system, which is very cool as well, because sometimes when you have a theory about something, you can go so far down that tunnel vision of like, no, it's this thing, and I'm going to show, and I'm only going to show that, and not really relate the stories as they're being told to you, because you're trying to get them to fit a narrative. And you don't have that experience with the films and productions that you've done.
Yeah, well, that comes from writing for newspapers. I can definitively say that, because that's where I learned how to be objective. And thankfully, I had a really good editor at the newspaper who kind of like took me under his wing and showed me how to write, because I was not I went to college for one day. So I'm not the most intelligent person on earth. And he really, Robert McCune really was the guy that taught me how to be objective. Also, I was a huge fan of documentaries to begin with. And my favorite documentaries are not the sort of, what is his name? I just blanked on it. The guy that made like Mac and Me. Is that Roger? Is it Roger Moore? No, Roger Moore's
yeah,
James Bond.
Something like that. Right, yeah.
But anyway, like
the
guys who kind of like insert themselves into the narrative, that style of doc never appealed to me, which is funny because On the Trail of Bigfoot is very much that. But I always felt like those documentaries had an agenda, and that's what they wanted you to experience. And they wanted you to come out with like that worldview. That's never appealed to me. I'm more interested in just telling the story that we know, or, you know, the facts of the story we can learn, and then letting the audience, you know, make up their own mind, I guess. Kind of the opposite of like the Super Size Me style of documentary.
Michael Moore.
Michael Moore. That's it.
I had IMDb in my head too, because I'm like, oh my god, it's not Roger Moore.
And I'm not bagging on Michael Moore's.
No, he does his own thing.
He's a great documentarian. As far as like filmmaking goes, I'm a fan of the way he makes docs, but that was never the style of documentary that appealed to me. And so all I'm doing is taking the style that I know I enjoy, which is the more objective, you know, approach, and letting the audience make up their own mind. Also, I think that is why a general audience will digest our stuff, whereas they might not digest something, you know, like Finding Bigfoot.
No, totally. Okay, we have to take a quick break, and we will be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Destiny Beard, the lyrical soprano who will haunt your dreams. With her alluring melodies and intricate harmonies, this dark siren of wistful song shall capture your soul and lead you into the night. Check out Destiny's new single, The Haunting Is Over, with international musicians Sam Haines and Gary Bennett, as well as her other musical works at destinybeard.com.
Most know Florida as the land of endless sunny beaches, but the state is home to numerous eerie legends and mysterious creatures. The Everglades is home to the elusive skunk ape. In Key West lies an uncanny doll reputed to have a life of its own. Join Mark Muncy and illustrator Carrie Schultz as they uncover the history behind the state's creepiest stories in unusual locations. The Dark Side of the Sunshine State, presented in Eerie, Florida, from History Press.
We are back. Okay, had a question mark right before we went into break, I think.
Yeah, I did have a question. So, can you tell me about any times while filming all of your projects? I know we worked together on the Trail of UFOs, Dark Skies, and there were some moments on that. It seemed like from the documentary that actually genuinely surprised you, caught you off
Hmm.
guard. Have
Yeah.
there been any others like that, or even then?
The biggest is the one that happened on the Chestnut Ridge 2 years ago, where we had multiple, I guess you'd call them orbs or mystery lights in the woods that were seen by 10 to 15 of us. That was probably the most intense experience I've had in the woods, and that outside of Heather and I being essentially surrounded by what we think were Bigfoot on her property, which was the same year. So we went from, it's funny because we went from years of making this stuff with nothing happening to in this 1 year, a lot of stuff happened. But that experience on the Chestnut Ridge was really wild. We were out there with Eric Altman and some of his group. And if you watch the series, The Ridge, you can see it kind of, but it's so chaotic that it's hard to get the full scope of what actually happened. But basically, like in 3 different locations, multiple people saw these lights moving through the woods, including Zach, who's my director of photography on a lot of my stuff. And Zach has no belief in any of this. I mean, he'll flat out tell you he doesn't think there's a Bigfoot, there's no UFOs, just like he doesn't buy any of it. And he had lights come to within like 20 feet of him and was completely freaked out when I talked to him. So that experience was really wild just because it went on for so long. Like one of the weirder things we experienced that night was Courtney and I could see these lights down a dirt road, like ahead of us. And there were people on both ends of the dirt road. We're standing on the one end, and then at the other end is another crew. And then somewhere in the middle are these lights. Eric Altman was there, and he was looking at these lights through, I think he was looking at the lights through thermal or something like that. And he could see them, and we could see them. So we radio the other group. We're like, you guys have no lights on, correct? And everyone had lights off, and they were actually starting to move away from us. So that wasn't it. So Courtney and I walked down this trail to where these lights were. And when we get to where the lights are, like we walked to within 10 to 20 feet of these things, and then they just blinked out. But Eric could still see the lights. So we're like on top of the lights, and he's like, we're still looking at them. So that was really weird. That was one thing that happened that night that was bizarre. But yeah, I mean, that experience still takes the cake just because so many people were there. And the thing with Heather, on her property, we were making a series called the Bigfoot Project that was supposed to be basically like a not live action, obviously it's live action. It was going to be a podcast with like an investigative component. And, the first night out there, I was going to interview Heather, and I don't even know if we were planning on really filming. We had our kids. So I had Tommy, who at the time was only 4. And then she had her youngest, Lily, and Jensen. We had started a bonfire, we had pizza, we're just hanging out. And then there was a wood knock at the woods above where we were. And it was very distinctive. I mean, I've tried to explain to people the wood knocks you would hear out there were not, a lot of times you hear this stuff in the woods. It's like, well, was that what I think it was? This was like very clearly something pounding on what's interesting about that is I keep saying wood knock, but it wasn't a wood knock. It was what we believe it was actually there's a bunch of old rubber drums up in the forest above the cabin where we would sleep. And we had hit one of those earlier in the night. And that was the sound we were hearing. It was like they were echoing or mimicking what we had done earlier. So they made the sound. And then, the rest of that night was insane. I hiked off down the trail by myself at one point that leads to the cabin where we all were. And I got back in the woods and immediately was aware that there were other somethings in the woods with me. And so I went and got Heather, and Heather and I were standing on this trail, and they essentially came in from all sides. No concern about us hearing them. I mean, it was walking as clear on dead leaves and all that, cracking, branches cracking, all that stuff. There was a rock that landed fairly close to us. While all that's happening, the kids were in the cabin, the hunting cabin, and they were in a back room. They were actually in the area where we sleep on the one bed watching an iPad. And Corey, Heather's husband, was on the porch of the cabin, and he heard footsteps approach the back of the cabin right where the kids were. So there was a lot of that night was pretty crazy. The next day is when I had my sighting, but for some reason that night, just they weren't shy. And I find that really odd. Even today I find that really odd, because the experiences I've had prior to that, which weren't many, but the experiences I'd have were always kind of like, did I just hear what I think I heard, or that kind of thing. This was like, no, I mean, they're walking right up to you.
Yeah, that's unique. That's definitely unique, because we're here in Western North Carolina, and the ones around here supposedly are super, super dodging people, because they're so used to people hitting the Smoky Mountains and all that.
Yeah.
And
wait, you're in Western North Carolina?
that's where we're at. Yeah.
I thought you were still in Florida. Wait, where at in Western North Carolina?
We're about 40 minutes south of Asheville. We're near Waynesville.
I would have loved to have interviewed you guys for that movie. I didn't know. We were filming over
about
in
it back
We
in
talked about
Bigfoot, but we missed you. So
Yeah.
This is typical me. Yeah, we were in Bryson City. That's where we shot The Ancients.
yeah, that's like 30 minutes from us. So,
Yeah, my
Yeah.
dad's whole family is from that part of the country. So
yeah,
I'm super.
Eric-
I'll tell you
Eric is,
what, we'd love to get you guys involved, and I will make sure that Heather actually holds me to this. But we're gonna make a series down there probably next year, just because I had such a good time filming down there, and my cousin runs the genealogy society in Bryson City, and there's connections, in town. We have Breedloves are everywhere down there. So I want to go down there and film a series. So you guys would be great to have involved in that.
we'd be
Love that.
happy to be a part of it. Erika loves the Boojum Distillery up in
Mhm.
Waynesville, and
I'm
then
a big fan of the Boojum period. This is one of my favorite cryptids because it involves drinking and gems. I think it's the two best things in the entire universe.
we did the whole Road to Nowhere, and
Yeah,
a lot on Spearfinger. Our next book is Eerie Smoky Mountains. So it's
very cool. You'll have to watch. I mean, the movie for Kickstarter backers should be going out pretty soon. But that's all. I mean, the whole thing's Western North Carolina based. So
nice, right at home for us. So all right, let's get back to back on track with the here. So let's see. What would you give advice for an aspiring filmmaker? What would you say? Somebody who wants to get into making these documentaries or a series, potentially, even just a YouTube thing.
the thing that I notice the most about wannabe filmmakers, and I say wannabe in a nice way. I'm not like I was a wannabe filmmaker for most of my life. But the biggest thing is don't focus as much on filmmaking, focus on storytelling. Because anyone can make a movie. Like, seriously, any idiot can make a movie. If I can do it, anyone can do it. What I don't think people can do naturally is tell a story. And so for some people, it comes very naturally. It's a part of my family history. So like it's in my blood. But I know a ton of people who are very talented at editing who don't know how to tell a story. And so, like you can learn all the little ins and outs of the technical side of filmmaking and still make nothing but crap. And, especially if you're trying to do paranormal stuff, like the story is where your focus really has to be, whether that's learning structural things, like different ways of structuring your story, or, like how to transition between, a creepy story and local history, whatever it is. Storytelling should be your number one priority when coming into filmmaking, narratives or documentaries, whatever. Story is the most important part of it. So that's always what I say. But I mean, I legitimately believe anyone can make a movie, because I did it. And if I can do it, anyone can do it. And we did it on no money. Like Minerva Monster was made for like $500. Beast of Whitehall was made twice and, filmed twice. And the second time I filmed it, it was myself, Brandon Dalo, who just does music, was really just kind of there hanging out. And then my dad was our driver, and he would hold a reflector. And that was my crew on Beast of Whitehall, which has been seen, literally millions of times on YouTube alone. It's like 800,000 views, but it had been out there for years before that and had something like 6 or 7 million views on Amazon. The other thing I think that is important is with the way things are today, there's a really good chance you can make something that will be seen by a lot of people. And so the polish part of it is so important. Like, just keep working on it. And when it's as good as you think it can get, it can always get better. You also have to learn how to let stuff go. But, you know, like polishing this stuff is really important, because there are a million, probably no exaggeration, there's a million paranormal cryptid YouTube channels out there. And a lot of those people don't stand apart because they really do rush through the edits, and, you know, like, and or more than likely, I said that's a little judgy. More than likely, they just don't have the time to sit there and really polish this stuff, because a lot of these people are doing this in their spare time. Not everyone has been as blessed as STM to actually do this for a living. But that's the kind of thing that'll make your stuff stand apart from a lot of what's out there. Is just, I always talk to editors, like new guys that come into STM, like Tyler or whatever, and I'm always like, you're 1 second of editing can save your project in the eyes of someone, you know, who's viewing it for the first time. Like, one cutting out of an interview before there's like an awkward second of them just sitting there can save a movie for a lot of people. And it separates it. You know, people subconsciously, I think, especially people who watch the paranormal stuff, subconsciously people understand editing, whether they realize it or not. And so when you watch a bad edit or an amateurish edit, it stands out to you. You know, this is amateurish, even if you enjoy it. You know, what's funny is I used to get really offended. I still kind of do. I used to get offended when people would say it's very professional. Like, this is a very professional film. Because to me, I don't want people to watch my stuff and even think about whether it's amateurish or professional. If they say it's professional, then they're not just watching it as a movie. They're watching it as, oh, this is a nice little independent documentary. I was expecting this to be garbage. It's kind of nice.
Yeah,
you know, I'd rather
taken out of the story, and they were actually like, oh,
this is professional. Yeah, I'd rather just have them living in the story that we're making.
You know, you said that, and I think it's very true also for people who are writing in this community and writing in general. No matter what you do, I don't care if it's gardening, you're going to get better as time goes on and you do more. Everything you do, I always make the akin to doing, starting to go jogging. Like, I want to be I'm going to do a 5K. Oh, the first time you go out, you're going to be a superstar until the second day when your body hates you forever and ever for what you did. But you'll get better and better at it. You'll get better faster. Also, utilizing people who know what they're doing. Like, go watch. You literally said it. I watched the films and I mimicked what I saw that I loved about these films. Yeah. You have to do that. And also, don't take on a project that's so huge that if you're doing it in your spare time, you can't get it done. You don't have to make a feature-length motion picture in order to communicate your stories that you want to communicate. But doing anything, utilize that. And you said editing. I mean, I think that's true for writing too. If you don't have a good editor, no matter how great the story is, you're going to throw it away if it's annoying to watch. You watch, annoying to read. You just go, I can't. No matter how great it is, you just go, I can't do this because it's not fun to be a part of. You know?
Oh yeah. The work side of it is over. A lot of times when I talk to people who want to be filmmakers, they tell me how lucky I am. And I do genuinely believe that I'm incredibly blessed to be able to do this. But the fact is that there's a ton of work that went into building STM. The amount of money I made for the first 3 or 4 years I was doing this was actually a huge pay cut versus what I was making when I was doing medical billing. You know, there's a lot of sacrifice that goes into any creative endeavor, but you know, when you're trying to make movies and you've never made a movie, like, you better be willing to spend most of your time, like most of your free time, learning how to do that thing, you know, because I didn't have the luxury of going to film school. I didn't, you know, I learned. It's funny when I look back on it now, I was learning filmmaking by watching like YouTubers. I would watch Film Riot or Casey Neistat or Peter McKinnon, and they would talk about, you know, like storytelling beats and things like that. And all the tricks I learned early on were from almost exclusively watching other people talk about making movies. You know, I mean, so even if I wasn't actively working, I was working because I was trying to learn, you know, how to do. And don't ever stop doing that, because I think that's the other thing. There comes a point where maybe you're doing what you always wanted to do. And you might have the mindset of, oh, I made it. I've done this so long that I kind of know what I'm doing now. And I've been in that place. But that's not a good place, because you get your work, it gets stagnant. A lot of people respond to STM because what we do, the movies all kind of feel different to me. Maybe not on the Trail of Bigfoot or on the Trail of UFOs, but the films, the Minerva to Whitehall to Mothman Legacy, Flatwoods, every movie kind of has its own style. And that style is influenced heavily by just constantly learning. And if you love movies, it's way easier because it's not really work. It just feels like I spent probably 3 hours yesterday watching film essays on YouTube, just because like that kind of thing still really lights my fire and gives me ideas for how to tell stories.
Something else to inspire. That's always the
Mhm.
key. All right, now you've moved on. You, like I said, you've done some publishing. You're doing other things like now, but we've also got the big event coming up, the Small Town Monster Fest. We were happy to participate in that, your first year of that. Now we're on to Small Town Monster Fest 2. So tell me how that evolved.
Well, we did that Minerva Monster Day in 2015 and 2016. Both events were really good, but I always loved that marriage of like movies and cryptids, and I'm a huge comic book nerd, so like the Comic-Con kind of atmosphere always appealed to me. So I just wanted to bring that to Canton, like put it in, because Minerva Monster Day was a small town festival, outdoor festival. And so I wanted to see, what we could do with kind of doing something similar, but very different at the same time. This year we're introducing like workshops, and there's the live podcasts and movies and all that stuff as well. But the workshops is something we were talking about doing last year, and now we can add that into the schedule this year. So it's taking a lot of what I respond to with Comic Cons and then integrating it into, the cryptid paranormal world. Not that we're the first people to do this. I think honestly, it's becoming kind of common, but it's never a given that we're going to do this year to year. It's just, we really enjoyed the experience of doing it last year. And I was like, let's bring it back and see what we can add to it this year. And then we'll see where it goes from there. But it's a Comic-Con that's devoted to cryptids and the paranormal. That's the best way to put it.
So I've got to ask, what is something during filming? You talked about the orbs and stuff like that, but I want to talk about interviewing people. Who's somebody that you interviewed that it really kind of surprised you what came up during the interview process?
There's two, and I'm blanking on his name, but during Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, we interviewed a man that we were not supposed to be able to interview. Stan Gordon talked him into interviewing and telling us his story. And this guy was an investigator, UFO investigator for years, but he feels like he had an abduction experience multiple times. And when it started trickling down to his grandson having similar experiences, he got out of the game entirely. If I remember it, he actually burned all of his UFO material. And so he got completely out of it. And interviewing him was one of the first times I interviewed someone where I was creeped out just by the interview. I mean, the interview was very unsettling, mostly because you could see it impacted him so heavily. And then there was a lot to the story that he didn't tell. He wasn't willing to tell on camera. So he had to shut the cameras off at a certain point. We're all squeezed in this we filmed this interview like in this foyer of the rental house we were in. And so we're all squeezed in this tiny area, and he tells us to shut the cameras off. And then he told us probably some of the creepier alien abduction kind of experiences that I've ever heard, mostly because they involved his grandson, who was just a little boy at the time. Very, very unsettling stuff. That interview always stands out to me. The other one just happened. It was during filming on the Trail of Bigfoot, the Ancients. We were in the rental house, and there's a local investigator, a Bigfoot investigator named Jeff Carpenter. And Jeff, I'd never met him before, but something about some of these people, you meet them and you immediately take a liking to them. Like maybe a liking isn't even the right word. It's just like you feel a kinship there that's very odd, and it's hard to put a finger on. So Jeff and I, we're conducting this interview, and Jeff right from the get-go wanted to tell me about his dad. And so the Ancients is all about my dad and my dad's family and the importance of family and that kind of thing. And so Jeff wanted to talk about his dad. And, like the interview goes over an hour. It's 90% about Bigfoot, but occasionally he'd just tell these little moments. He'd share things about his dad throughout the interview. And we get down, we'd been doing this for like an hour, and Jeff hits this moment where he talks about how he'll go in the woods still today, and it's so he can talk to his dad while he's out in the woods. And then he started talking about how his dad told him, I have this line in the movie, but I think I'm going to forget it. He said, his dad said something to the effect of, if you go into the woods, I can't remember what he says, but anyway, whatever it was, it sent me over the emotional edge, and I started crying in the interview, which is the first time I've ever had that experience. I've never cried in an interview before, but it was unexpected, and it was so strange because everything he was saying perfectly formed the thoughts I was having while making the movie. And then there was also the fact that he was able to tie my family's property in Needmore back to all these Bigfoot sightings. And so in the movie, like I could not, sometimes it's easy, like on the Trail of Bigfoot, the origin, my mom had died. I'm just going to talk about it in the narration because it's my experience as I'm making the movie, but it doesn't have anything to do with Bigfoot, so, and that's fine. In that film, it's fine. It works well. In this movie, I'm like, I really don't know how I'm tying the fact that the movie opens in my family cemetery in Needmore. I don't know how I'm tying that to like Bigfoot history. And so this guy, was an investigator. And then it turned out that there were all these sightings that had happened just over the hill from my family's property. It was like the perfect full circle kind of thing. I don't think that's what made me cry. I think I was legitimately very moved by, how much Jeff loved his dad and missed his dad and that kind of thing. And as someone who loved my mom and misses my mom, I totally identify with that. But that was a really cool experience. That Ancient shoot might be my all-time favorite shoot, which is crazy because it was a very abbreviated shoot. We did the whole thing in like 4 days, really only three full days of filming. But it was so amazing to be down there and feel connected to my family, like even though they're gone, and then finding a story there that I could tell that has a really good message, but that also circles back to Bigfoot was really cool.
That's awesome. Okay, we are getting near the end, which is terrible because I know we could talk forever and ever. So let's do some shameless self-promotion plugs. So Small Town Monster Fest, it's open to the public on the 29th.
Yeah, 29th is the main event at the downtown Canton Doubletree, and tickets are available online or at the door.
Awesome.
That's where you do that. If you go to smalltownmonsters.com, you'll find the links and everything on there. Friday night, the 28th, we're doing a film premiere. It's not even night. It's at 3:30 in the afternoon. But we're doing a film premiere for the Cursed Waters, which is our Ogopogo documentary that was directed by Eli Watson and is currently my son Tommy's favorite movie because he just keeps rewatching it.
Ogopogo is great. We love him.
It's funny. We made an Ogopogo movie because I didn't talk about it. My introduction to the paranormal in the modern era was a buddy of mine burned a bunch of documentaries on a DVD and gave it to me. It was like a hard time in my life, and he thought I needed something to take my mind off of it. So he burned all these docs on a DVD, and one of them was an Ogopogo documentary. So I thought that was kind of fitting that we made an Ogopogo movie.
Nice.
That's very cool. Well, Seth, thank you so much for joining us on the show. We really appreciate it. We're looking forward to seeing you at Small Town Monsters.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm always down to talk about this kind of stuff with you guys.
We will absolutely have you back on. Mark, how do you want to take us away today?
Well, I'll just say thanks again to all our listeners, and thanks to our patrons on Patreon for keeping the show on the air and keeping this ball rolling. But we want to thank Seth so much for having us on, and enjoyed working with you in the past. Looking forward to working with you in the future. We'll see you at Small Town Monsters. Please, any travelers, visit us eerietravels.com and join us there. And Seth, at some point, hopefully we can get Small Town Monsters presents The Bench Leg of Goble Ridge, my family cryptid. That's the one we'll have to work on together. So
yeah,
Eastern Kentucky holler monster, head of a man, body of a cow, and a wooden leg that beats up bad people. So come
That's
on.
very specific. So yeah,
Very-
I'll have to learn more.
And promise nothing. Anyway, Mark, wrap up the show, my friend.
All right. Thank you again, everybody. And when you're out on those roads and you're traveling along and you're looking for something spooky, tune into Small Town Monsters, watch one of their documentaries, watch one of their episodes on YouTube, get yourself in that right place to go exploring and going on your eerie travels. And we will see you on the other side.